Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the English Daily Book Summary YouTube channel. In order to not stop learning, listen to an English book summary every day for free.
Al Pacino, Sonny Boy, a memoir. What happens when raw talent meets obsession? Long before becoming a living screen legend, Al Pacino was just a kid in the South Bronx, watching his exhausted mother return from factory shifts. On those humble afternoons, he'd transform their small apartment into imagined movie sets, recreating entire films from memory. Not for an audience, though, just for himself. In the process, he unwittingly laid the groundwork for an artistic method that would reshape American cinema. In this blink, we'll trace how a working-class kid developed into one of cinema's most celebrated figures. And we won't only look at the roles that made him famous, we'll explore his artistic obsession, his personal struggles, and his constant search for truth in performance, telling a tale of how to maintain one's authentic self in a world designed to strip it away. With that said, let's now step into the shadows of the 1940s Bronx, where our story begins. A Star is Born. In 1940, as war raged in Europe, Alfredo James Pacino was born to teenage parents in the South Bronx. His father was barely 18, his mother just a few years older, young even for that era. Their marriage wouldn't last, though. Before Al turned 2, they separated, leaving Rose Pacino to raise her son alone. The two of them moved between furnished rooms in Harlem before settling into her parents' apartment in the South Bronx. In that crowded apartment, young Sonny Boy Pacino learned early to make friends with his imagination. With no television and few playmates, he found escape in the movies, where his mother, exhausted from days of factory work, would take him almost daily. These were his first acting lessons. He'd return home to recreate every character he'd seen, bringing them to life in their cramped apartment. But darkness lurked beneath the surface of their working-class life. When Al was 6, he returned from playing in the streets to find an ambulance outside their building. His mother, who struggled with what doctors called anxiety neurosis, had attempted suicide. Though she survived, the incident marked him deeply. The streets of the South Bronx shaped him as much as his family did. Along with his crew, Cliffy, Bruce, and Petey, young Al roamed the neighborhood, scaling tenement roofs, dodging local gangs, and playing street games like Ringo-Labio, a variation on tag. While his friends would later succumb to drugs and violence, Al found a different escape. At school, his teacher Blanche Rothstein recognized something special in him, choosing him to read passages from the Bible at assemblies. His booming voice and natural dramatic flair led to roles in school plays. Then came the evening that would crack his world open. At 15, watching a production of Chekhov's The Seagull at the old Ellesmere Theater, Pacino was thunderstruck. Though he barely understood the plot, the raw power of live theater took him completely by surprise. He left the theater that night knowing he'd found his calling in life. The High School of Performing Arts beckoned next, promising formal training and a path forward. But life had other plans. As his mother's mental health deteriorated and bills mounted, he had to drop out at 16 to work. He cycled through various jobs while pursuing his real education in the streets and theaters of New York. It was during this period that he first spotted Charlie Lawton, an encounter that would alter the course of his life, though he didn't know it yet. From student to stage performer. At 18, Al Pacino found himself at Martin's Bar and Grill in Manhattan. Through the window, he could see the Herbert Berghoff studio, an acting school he dreamed of attending. It was here that he first spotted Charlie Lawton sitting in a booth wearing a baseball cap. The moment their eyes met, Pacino knew that Charlie would be his teacher. Though Charlie was only 10 years his senior, he possessed a literary brilliance and knack for wisdom that the young Pacino desperately craved. But with no money for tuition, Pacino resorted to cleaning the studio's hallways in exchange for acting classes. It wasn't long before Charlie became more than a teacher to Pacino. He was a drinking companion, artistic guide, and the father figure Pacino had always sought. They often went for long walks through Manhattan streets, with Charlie introducing him to poets and novelists Pacino had never heard of. One story Charlie told would become Pacino's artistic mantra, the tale of the Flying Wallendas, a family of high-wire performers who after losing several members in a tragic fall, returned to perform again. When asked why, the father simply said, "Because life's on the wire. The rest is just waiting." This philosophy of courage in the face of risk would go on to define Pacino's approach to acting. The young actor's first real breakthrough came with Israel Horovitz's play, The Indian Wants the Bronx. The role of Murph, a volatile street urchin, felt like something Pacino had lived rather than merely studied. When the play moved to off-Broadway's Astor Place Theater, the producer insisted he re-audition. 30 seconds into his reading, Horovitz yelled out for Pacino to stop. He'd got the part. When the play opened at Astor Place Theater, one performance drew a special audience member. Martin Bregman, the powerhouse manager behind Barbra Streisand. Later, when Pacino arrived at Bregman's luxurious office, the security guard almost didn't let the shabby Bronx kid up the stairs. But Bregman had seen something special on that stage, and his decision to take on this unknown actor would end up transforming both their lives. In 1969, Pacino made his Broadway debut in Does a Tiger Wear a Necktie?, playing Bickham, a troubled addict with the soul of a poet. His powerful portrayal earned him a Tony Award. At the ceremony, he considered giving an irreverent speech about his grandmother saying in Italian that even a schmuck can win a Tony, but decided against it at the last minute. Throughout this period, he remained devoted to experimental theater, performing in tiny Greenwich Village venues. One night, after one of their long walks through Manhattan, Charlie stopped and turned to him. "Al, you're going to be a big star." Without waiting, Pacino replied, "I know, Charles, I know." He couldn't explain how he knew. After all, he was still scraping by, still an unknown. But something inside him recognized that these early struggles were preparing him for something bigger. The wire was there, waiting to be walked. When Michael Corleone came calling, the phone call that would change Pacino's life came on an ordinary afternoon. It was Francis Ford Coppola talking about directing a new movie based on The Godfather, Mario Puzo's best-selling novel. Then came the bombshell. He wanted Pacino to play Michael Corleone. The young actor, still primarily performing in Greenwich Village theaters, thought he might be having a nervous breakdown. Landing a role like this from a director himself, without any agent involved, was a 1 in a million chance. Reality hit hard when he arrived at Paramount for screen tests. The studio wanted big stars: Jack Nicholson, Robert Redford, Warren Beatty, anyone but this unknown stage actor from the Bronx. In the book, Michael Corleone called himself the sissy of the Corleone family, someone small and delicate, not visibly threatening. But that didn't mean the studio wanted Pacino. During his screen test, wearing an early version of Michael's army uniform, he had to perform the wedding scene exposition with Diane Keaton, explaining his family's business over glasses of water they pretended was wine. He later compared his portrayal to nurturing a garden, explaining that Michael's transformation required patience and careful development. The pressure mounted during early filming, crew members avoided eye contact on set, and rumors of his impending firing circulated daily. The moment everything changed came during an April night shoot in a tiny restaurant under an L train. For 15 hours, Pacino worked through the scene where Michael kills Sollozzo and McCluskey, his co-stars Al Lettieri and Sterling Hayden helping maintain his morale in the smoke-filled, inferno-like room. Then after filming the murders, he had to run out and jump onto a moving car. With no stunt double available, Pacino attempted the jump himself, missed, and twisted his ankle badly. Lying in the gutter on White Plains Road, looking up at the Bronx sky, Pacino felt an unexpected wave of relief. The injury could be his escape from this overwhelming pressure, a legitimate reason for the studio to recast. But they shot him up with cortisone instead, and when Francis showed the restaurant scene to the studio, something clicked. The footage revealed what Pacino had been building toward, a character who emerged from nowhere, whose transformation happened gradually. Pacino described his early interpretation of Michael as an unremarkable, unfocused young man, drifting through life. For him, the character's transformation finally occurred in the scene with Enzo, as Michael noticed his own hands remained steady while the baker trembled with fear. When The Godfather premiered at the Loews State Theater in Times Square in March 1972, Pacino couldn't watch. Wearing a huge bow tie, he slipped out as soon as the lights dimmed and spent the night drinking at a bar around the corner. The film's success hit like a wave. Standing at a traffic light weeks later, a young woman recognized him. "Hi, Michael." The moment struck him to his core. His anonymity, something he'd always cherished, was now gone forever. Between Serpico and Sonny. In late 1972, just months after The Godfather propelled him to stardom, Pacino's next major role emerged. His manager, Marty Bregman, had acquired the rights to a true tale of police corruption, the story of Frank Serpico, an honest cop who exposed widespread corruption in the New York Police Department. When Pacino met the real Serpico, he knew right away he could embody the role. A defining conversation occurred in Montauk, Long Island, overlooking the waves. When Pacino asked why Serpico hadn't just taken the payoffs and given the money away, Serpico answered after a long pause. If he had done that, who would he be while listening to Beethoven? The profound simplicity of his answer provided Pacino with everything he needed to understand the character. Shooting the film was anything but smooth, however. When the original director, John Avildsen, was suddenly fired, the producers made an unprecedented demand. They wanted Pacino to find the replacement. Overwhelmed by this responsibility, he found himself in what he called the pompous room of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, interviewing a young Martin Scorsese before finally landing on Sidney Lumet. During filming, Pacino went on actual police calls for research, but stopped after witnessing officers charge up a stairwell with drawn guns to investigate a possible robbery. The experience convinced him to end his field research. After embodying the rigid moral certainty of Frank Serpico, Pacino had to find a wildly different frequency to channel Sonny Boy in Dog Day Afternoon. After seeing the first day's footage, Pacino knew something was missing. The night before the reshoot, alone in his Upper East Side apartment with half a gallon of white wine, he paced the floor for hours, searching for the essence of the character, something that would make this failed bank robber breathe. The next morning, Pacino arrived on set vibrating with newfound purpose. Antsy, animated, agitated. His castmates whispered about a possible nervous breakdown, but Pacino knew he had found something special, and his subtle shift in mindset allowed Sonny to develop naturally. The film's most electrifying moment came out of nowhere. As Pacino prepared to address the crowd outside the bank, assistant director Bert Harris whispered in his ear, "Say Attica." When Pacino asked what he meant, Harris insisted, "Say Attica." The reference was to the recent prison uprising in upstate New York that had been brutally suppressed just months earlier. The moment Pacino shouted Attica to the crowd, something extraordinary happened. The assembled extras and onlookers erupted in genuine, passionate outrage. It demonstrated to Pacino exactly what film could be. That special moment when you take a risk and something unexpected breaks through. Even director Sidney Lumet acknowledged they had captured lightning in a bottle, telling Pacino the scene had moved beyond their control. Both films earned him Academy Award nominations, though he remained too anxious to attend the ceremonies. The performances represented a new kind of screen acting, raw, immersive, pushing beyond traditional boundaries. Working with Sidney Lumet on both projects taught Pacino how to walk the tightrope between preparation and spontaneity. For the crucial phone call between Sonny and Leon in Dog Day Afternoon, Lumet allowed Pacino and Chris Sarandon to improvise multiple takes, then wove their best moments together into the devastating final scene. Walking away from fame. By 1984, nearly a decade after Dog Day Afternoon, Pacino was reeling from the controversial reception of Scarface. The film, which would later become a cultural phenomenon, had initially shocked critics and audiences with its violence. Seeking escape from both the criticism and his own growing disillusionment with Hollywood, he found refuge on an English farm in Norfolk, 100 miles from London. The cottage was humble, creaking floorboards, secondhand furniture, windows that let in too much cold, but it offered something he couldn't find in America anymore: anonymity. He had come to England to film Revolution, but in truth, he was already retreating from the industry itself. Director Hugh Hudson, fresh from his Oscar triumph with Chariots of Fire, had promised a revolutionary take on the American War of Independence. But as Pacino trudged through Norfolk's muddy fields in period costume, carrying a young actor on his shoulders for take after take, something felt increasingly wrong. The production was hemorrhaging money as Hudson transformed humble town squares into colonial New York. When Pacino finally saw the rough cut, his heart sank. He warned Hudson the film wasn't ready, and its release would not end well. But Warner Brothers wanted their Oscar contender, and the film was rushed into theaters. The studio's marketing campaign plastered Pacino's face across posters, his eyes vacant and haunted, an image that seemed to capture not just his character's shell shock, but his own artistic crisis. As critics savaged the release, Pacino withdrew not just from Hollywood, but from commercial filmmaking entirely. So he returned to his roots in experimental theater, adapting The Local Stigmatic, a savage one-act play that had obsessed him since his early off-Broadway days. Its story of two gamblers who attack a celebrity spoke to something raw in him, the volatile relationship between fame and authenticity, between the performer and the performed. In dingy rehearsal spaces, far from Hollywood, he began dismantling and rebuilding the play, searching for revelations about his own relationship with stardom. In the midst of this artistic soul-searching, he reconnected with Diane Keaton, his co-star from The Godfather and former romantic partner. She understood his need to retreat better than anyone and supported his experimental work. But she also saw the danger in his withdrawal. When his money began running out, down to his last $90,000, she intervened, telling his lawyer plainly that Pacino needed saving from his own artistic purity. The harsh assessment carried truth, however. Pacino had never learned to navigate the business side of his career, preferring to live in the artistic spaces between commercial success and experimental theater. But reality was catching up with him. Then, walking through Central Park one day, Pacino was stopped by a stranger who, almost like an old friend, asked where he'd been. They needed him back on screen. The words named something he already knew. His exile couldn't last forever. The question now was no longer if he would return to Hollywood, but how. Old dog, new tricks. In 1992, Al Pacino arrived at the People magazine photo shoot with the easy confidence of a man who had mastered his craft. Give me playful, Mr. Pacino. Click. Give me pensive. Pop. Be naughty. Pacino complied with every request, even rolling around on the floor like a wrestler without an opponent. The shoot was meant to coincide with the release of The Godfather Part 3. But when the editors saw the film and its lukewarm reception, the cover story vanished. Yes, it was a setback, but what followed would be Pacino's most transformative period. Preparing for the role of Lieutenant Colonel Frank Slade in Scent of a Woman, he immersed himself completely in the reality of being blind. During weapons training, Pacino worked with a military instructor who taught him to disassemble and reassemble a .45 pistol while blindfolded. Each time he successfully completed the task, the instructor would let out a triumphant exclamation, "Hooah!" This military expression of approval sparked something in Pacino. Here was the key that would unlock the character's essence. It became one of his most famous lines. Winter mornings at Kaufman Astoria Studios revealed a different side of his process. Between takes, Pacino would pace the perimeter, moving his fingers, hands, arms, and legs in repeated patterns. He wryly acknowledges that actors sometimes develop quirky rituals to manage their nerves. Then in 1993, the inevitable happened. After 7 previous Oscar nominations and losses, Pacino finally won for Scent of a Woman. When his name was announced, he threw back his head with a knowing sigh. His acceptance speech began with, "Well, you broke my streak," drawing laughter from the crowd. By the end, the entire audience had risen to their feet, delivering a standing ovation that wasn't just for this one performance, but for his entire career. His renaissance continued through the 1990s. While filming Heat with Robert De Niro during the day, he would spend nights shooting Looking for Richard, his documentary exploring Shakespeare's Richard III. Michael Mann, recognizing the passion behind the project, even lent Pacino part of Heat's crew. Pacino is now in his 80s, but he's still chasing those moments of spontaneous artistry he first discovered on a small stage in the Bronx. That 14-year-old boy in Light Up the Sky, crashing through a door in his first ever role, had found something rare and precious. Performance is pure instinct, unspoiled by technique. Through decades of method acting and careful preparation, he's never lost sight of that raw connection. While contemplating a film adaptation of King Lear and pursuing roles that still challenge him, he continues to live by Charlie Lawton's wisdom. Life's on the wire, everything else is just waiting. In this Blink to Sonny Boy by Al Pacino, you've heard the story of how a scrappy kid from the Bronx transformed himself into a Hollywood legend. Along the way, Pacino never lost his artistic soul. From recreating movies in his mother's apartment to winning an Oscar for Scent of a Woman, his path shows that the true artist doesn't care about winning awards. Instead, they walk the wire just as Pacino did, always searching for that electrifying moment of raw performance. Okay, that's it for this Blink. We hope you enjoyed it. If you can, please take the time to leave us a rating. We always appreciate your feedback. See you in the next Blink.